Good afternoon. Welcome to the IHE-Europe monthly webinar of February on the legal aspects of the EHDS regulation. We will start shortly. Before we start, let's go into some practicalities. Please keep your microphone muted during the webinar. All of the questions will be addressed after the presentation. During the presentation, feel free to put any questions in the chat. During the Q&A, you can enable your microphone and speak up yourself so that we can have an interaction. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available on the YouTube channel of IHE-Europe. There you can also access all our previous monthly webinars. So there are already many out there. We do call out to check it out. And the slides will also be made available on the webpage of IHE-Europe. In the same place where we announce our future webinars, it's under the Education tab of the IHE-Europe webpage. We also call out to follow us on LinkedIn, where we announce the webinars. As you might have seen, we are preparing the Connectathon week that will happen beginning of June in Vienna, Austria. Once again, we will have plenty of activities, events during the Connectathon testing. The registration for the Connectathon testing has been opened up. The Experience Days program has been put together and is published. You can find it all on the Connectathon page where the link is available. And we have a great 1.5 days of Experience Days. Early bird fees are available until the end of March, so we do encourage you to take advantage of this. So today we will be covering the legal aspects of the EHDS regulation. It's a concern for each and every one of us. There are still several years to go, but we will have to start as soon as possible. We are very happy today to have our main speaker, Vanya Pajic, together with Eva Sabayova. Eva Sabayova has recently joined IHE-Europe as e-health interoperability expert. She has already a lot of experience in her country, as well as at European level and on FHIR level. And our main speaker of today is Vanya Pajic. He is the chair of the legal work group of the EMSEC group, the eHealth Member States Expert Group, who is preparing a lot for the EHDS. Thank you so much for being with us, Vanya. We're looking forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours. Feel free to share. And while Vanya is sharing, I will recall the fact that questions will be addressed in the end. Feel free to put any questions in the chat meanwhile. So
hello everyone. Due to some technical details which we couldn't resolve, I'm sharing the entire screen, so I will just do it like this and then start the slideshow. Thank you for the really nice introduction. Hopefully, I will today try to cover some of the aspects, some of which are known, some of which may not be so known regarding the EHDS regulation. This is one caveat before we begin, is that many aspects of which I will be talking about are work in progress between various groups, including the legal group under the MyHealth@EU, under EMSEC. Another thing that I would like to mention is that I've done a few of these webinars and presentations over the last couple of months, And what I've found out typically is that there are varying degrees of understanding of the regulation. So I will kind of start gently, since I don't know where all of you are coming from in the sense of understanding and being involved with regulation. So I will start with like a general overview, an introduction, and then we will move on to some of the aspects of the regulation that we are, as member states under the EMSEC and eHealth Network are considering. So with that said, let's move on. So what I will try to do today during this 40-something minutes of this webinar is to give you an overview of the following aspects of the regulation. So first, as I said, I will try to do an introduction. I will discuss how the EHDS is a key initiative for digital health transformation in the EU. Some of its cross-border sharing aspects, focusing on the pillars of the regulation. So the electronic exchange format, the primary use and secondary use of data. Then I will discuss some of the core components and the infrastructures of the legal framework for the implementing parties, focusing on the primary and secondary use. I will then delve deeper into the legal and technical frameworks under the regulation, discuss the governance and stakeholder engagement, and give you a sort of roadmap and some of the future challenges that we are currently discussing in various legal groups across the EU. So first, a gentle introduction. So what is the EHDS? EHDS is a fairly complex regulation. It's quite large. It covers a lot of things. But the key thing to understand that this is primarily a key initiative for the digital health transformation of the EU. The main aim is to improve health data sharing across member states, while ensuring privacy and security. So you have, throughout the regulation, you have this kind of a balancing act between the sharing, the exchange of information, and ensuring privacy and security for the data subjects. It gives out the rules for the electronic health record, so EHR systems, in a single market for these types of systems and the documents that are being exchanged kind of within them. And the other two main pillars are the primary and secondary use of data, under which two infrastructures, massive infrastructures, are envisioned. So My Health at EU, which is already in many ways in use by the member states, and the Health Data at EU, which is for secondary. Now, again, I'm assuming that it's clear what these two, what the differences between these two types of data use are. Just to kind of briefly give an overview, is that primary use is the use of data for the delivery of healthcare, for treating patients, and secondary use is the use of data for research and other public interest purposes. So the focus of the first of the primary use pillar is to ensure seamless exchanges for continuity of healthcare, both within and across countries' borders, member states' borders. And within the secondary use is to make data available for research, policy making in a secure and safe way. So now to give a bit of a broader picture. So why is EHDS important? So sometimes we're kind of siloed in our own different respective fields, and we tend to not know and not realize what's going on in general. So this slide, I think, may come as a surprise to some of you, that the EHDS is just one data space out of I think 9 that are envisioned across the EU. So there are data spaces envisioned across different domains. So for example, mobility, energy, public administration, the skills in terms of academic skills, finance, agriculture, and so on. So each of these data spaces contains, from the perspective of the EU and from the perspective of the member states, high-value data sets typically coming from the public sector, so in healthcare in this case. And the intention is to build technical infrastructures to support these data spaces. These data spaces are, in a way, ecosystems of different data providers, intermediaries, and of course users that can provide and access and share data. And as a backbone to all of this is the need to have a secure exchange system of data between the EU member states. In the context, coming back to the EHDS, the main aim, the main goal is to empower patients with full control of their health data, improve continuity of care in cross-border settings, facilitate secure data sharing. This is especially true for research and recently AI-driven health innovations, for example. And kind of finally, as the final ultimate goal, to support the digital transformation of Europe's healthcare sector, to make it more secure, to make it more competitive, and to make it more robust. So when it comes to the infrastructures that will support the EHDS in the sense of, in the context of the primary and secondary data use that we discussed, we have two infrastructures that are being put in place. First one, the one that is already in use, is the MyHealth.eu, which is the data infrastructure for primary use of data. I don't think we need to go too much into detail because these are technical things and we are supposed to cover legal topics, but this is just to give you an understanding, this diagram of what goes on in a typical primary use infrastructure that we have today. So basically there's a data subject, in this case a patient. The patient provides the data to a health professional, and the health professional uses some kind of EHR system or some kind of record of this information on either a national, regional, or local level. And then if the patient travels to another country, say, they might be in need of receiving treatment there. And there, in that case, they would need to have their data transferred to other countries. At that point, this infrastructure is used for transferring the data between one country to another country, and all of this is supported by the so-called central services, which contain the terminologies and configurations of this exchange that enable it from country to country. By the way, can somebody confirm that you can still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
we do hear you.
Okay, because I heard a sound in my speakers. Okay, yeah, thanks. Okay, and then after tackling the primary use infrastructure, we have in many ways an even more complex infrastructure for the secondary use, which is called Health.EU, which is a cross-border infrastructure for secondary use. Here you have something that's kind of now being set up. The intention is to have these so-called health data access bodies, which are basically data holders. They have massive amounts of information, such as EHRs, health data registries, certain administrative data and healthcare, claims data as well, genomics data, and so on. And they are able to share this with other health data access bodies in other member states, in other countries. A typical user for the first use case is the healthcare professional treating the specific patient, whereas within the secondary use infrastructure, the typical users, the number of typical user is much more diverse. So you have researchers, public health professionals, authorities in member states, regulators, and innovators, researchers, and so on. So this is the secondary use infrastructure. Now, one of the main kind of backbones of the whole of the entire regulation is to provide interoperability for different data categories. Now, this is an ongoing work. This is a work in progress since several decades now, basically, ramping up to the maybe recent 6-7 years after this establishment, for example, of the primary use infrastructure. So for primary data, how the EHDS is now supporting this work and putting it into a legislative framework is that it endorses and provides additional information on the implementation of the European Electronic Health Record Exchange format. And although the regulation itself, and this is a question that I sometimes get, is whether the regulation endorses certain standards. It does not, so it does not mention standards. However, by endorsing and by legislating for the electronic exchange format, which in itself is it includes certain standards, it in a way kind of indirectly already supports a list of industry standards already in use by many member states, many organizations. So kind of nothing new, but basically now have your legislative framework supporting the interoperability for primary data. When it comes to secondary data, it gets much more complex due to the sheer volume and the different type of data that's in use. So you have EHRs, you have administrative data, reimbursement data, genetic, molecular data, data on medical devices, on wellness applications, other kind of environmental, behavioral, socioeconomic data, and then finally data from registries, biobanks, for example, and various data from clinical trials, cohort studies, even questionnaires, and so on. So it's a huge number of data that is being supported or legislated for in the regulation. Just to get a picture of this. Now, how does the legal framework work in itself? So first of all, it's important to understand that EHDS is kind of specific in the sense of, as I said, it's a large piece of legislation. So just the sheer volume of pages, if you just look at that from this perspective, it's really large. But it's also complex from the sense of the legal basis from which it kind of builds upon. So you have several existing or prior to the EHDS legal instruments that are referenced or that are kind of the basis that form the backbone of the EHDS. First and foremost, and maybe more, much more clearly than the others, is the GDPR and the Data Governance Act, the Data Act, which follows all this data protection context. Then you have EHDS, the AI Act, and the MDR, Medical Devices Regulation, and the so-called cross-border directive, which forms the governance backbone of most of the things that we are now discussing, establishing in its Article 14, the e-health network. Now, how the governance will work for the EHDS. So, in a nutshell, of course, there are many articles addressing this in the regulation, but basically you have the several different kind of tiers of governance. The biggest one is obviously, maybe most obvious, the member states. So the member states are required to set up what are called digital health authorities for primary use and health data access bodies for secondary use. These will govern the data exchange between different organizations, between different countries. Then member states are expected to provide coordination on the EU level in what is called the EHDS board, which will replace the e-health network as the main political and strategic body, but it also will take on many operational kind of day-to-day aspects of the governance as well. Then there will be steering groups for even more kind of day-to-day operational decisions for both primary and secondary data use. These will likely mostly come from already existing groups and subgroups within the the EMSEC, so the expert member state body for that is now tackling primary data only. Then there's what is expected is a bigger stakeholder engagement at the EU level in the stakeholder forum, which will exchange information and provide cooperation on many different levels regarding the implementation of the regulation. And then for the certification, because this is one of the key components of the regulation, you have the market surveillance authorities. Now, cross borders now, I think, yeah, it's unfortunately the window is kind of cut at the end, at least here, but hopefully you will be able to understand it and see it. So this is just to show that the regulation is apart from the legislative kind of basis, it also builds upon many years or several years at least of really implementation efforts in the member states on a technical level, building up systems to be able to provide exchanges of all of these data types between the member states. And here you see the map of Europe showing those countries in blue, in brown, that have set up the services already. So the services include at this point e-prescription, e-dispensation, and patient summary service. And additionally, services to exchange services for medical images, laboratory reports, and discharge reports are also now in the pipeline for implementation. And the bluish countries that you see are starting to implement those services. So in the next couple of years, you may expect that all the countries in the EU will have the technical setup required to exchange data. The current governance of all of these things is kind of complex. If you look at all the at the screen on the diagram, but it boils down to the following. So you have the e-health network as the primary political / strategic body. It has its own the task forces and subgroups, so the technical and semantic. And then on the operational level, you have the EMSEC and eHome. This is a joint member states, European Commission chaired bodies, which provide support to the member states implementing the cross-border infrastructures for the exchange of all these information, now being regulated within the in red have the legal work group, which I'm mostly involved with, which is providing the legal support to the member states and will continue to do that in the future. There are also obviously certain a list actually of projects which are devoted to primary use, and there are also projects for secondary use. And many of the outputs of these projects will become, especially, for example, the XDHR, which I'm also involved in. Mostly, it's the aim of this is to provide information for the implementing acts under the regulation, which will even further guide the member states in what they need to do to successfully implement specific provisions of the regulation regarding, primary data, the secondary data use, EHR exchange format, and so on. Now, I was asked to give more detail about the legal work group, as this is the group that some of you are already interacting with, and in its future form, you will be interacting with in the future. So just to give you kind of in a nutshell what the legal work group is about. So primarily speaking, the main purpose of the group is to support the member states in whatever they need to implement the services for the exchange of healthcare information across borders. This doesn't mean that we don't support the national kind of implementations, because they tie in together, but we are mostly focusing on the cross-border aspects. But we are also performing member state consultations for specific things related to the legislation in each country. So before the EHDS, we were focusing mostly on data protection under the GDPR and other relevant legislation, both the EU and the national ones. And to that, towards that extent, we were working on things like the PIN and the HPIN. So these are the information notices for the data subjects when the exchange of information takes place. Also, we have developed the so-called agreement between the national contact points, which is the contractual, it's a contract basically among the member states and the organizations exchanging information to be able to do so under common rules on the EU level. And we have also supported the data protection impact assessments in the member states as also a requirement of the GDPR. We have done this for patient summary and e-prescription and currently working on the lab reports and imaging and discharge reports. We're having regular meetings on which member state representatives are invited to discuss legal topics. We're organizing consultations, webinars, trainings, and many other things to support the member states. So this is kind of prior to this year, what the legal work group was about. The new task of the legal work group, and also another thing to mention is that the focus was on primary data, mostly with just kind of occasionally focusing on secondary data use, because this was something that was kind of out of scope of the whole infrastructure, my health and so on. Now, in 2020, starting with 2025, we are shifting the focus from GDPR and data protection to the EHDS and the support for the EHDS regulation implementation and coordination among the member states. So we are expanding the role to include also secondary data, obviously the EHDS regulation, and we are moving beyond the original contract and its provisions of the agreement that I just mentioned, and we are moving more towards what is regulated in the EHDS. So this is the extended scope of the legal group. We're also now starting to support the health network more, specifically under their newly established work plan for 2025, specifically priority 1, action item 1.1, legal work, which addresses some of the concerns and needs, most immediate needs of the member states to support the implementation of the EHDS. Apart from supporting the health network, we are in the process of establishing communication channels with other relevant groups discussing legal topics on the EU level, such as the communities of practice for secondary use. And we are constantly utilizing knowledge of dozens of key experts on the EU level from many member states. Some of them who have also participated in the council negotiations for the EHDS. As far as the work plan that we are supporting now, there are many different things that we are currently dealing with. I won't go too much into detail. You will have the slides afterwards. But basically, and this is why I'm also presenting this today, is that we are again offering and to support the member states in the EHDS implementation and all the different needs. Currently, we are starting to organize ourselves as kind of a parallel group to the old quote unquote legal group under the MSEG, where we are kind of recruiting different experts, legal experts across the EU to discuss the legal challenges for the implementation of the regulation, specifically concerning the interpretation of certain articles, also the steps that need to be taken on the national level to support the implementation of the regulation, developing legal tools, materials like templates, and similar resources that the legal experts in member states can use to support the implementation. We will be moving closer towards a national legal gap analysis to see whether member states are in terms of first of all being prepared for the implementation of the regulation, and then following up with certain implementation steps. And we are constantly, or actually starting to be engaged, but also in other groups we are already engaged with the member states. But we are planning to extend these consultations towards other stakeholders, other groups, from the member states to the stakeholders to the industry, just to make sure that the EHDS implemented in the best possible, the most optimal way. So this is kind of just a brief diagram showing where we are kind of coming from and aiming for. So we are now in the process of establishing what we kind of in working terms call a hub, legal working group hub, that will connect many different organizations, stakeholders, bodies across the EU. And we are already discussing what level of interaction we also need with the industry to support the member states, including SDOs, for example, organizations such as IHE, HL7, and so on. So here is the roadmap for the implementation of the EHDS. Again, I won't go too much into this. Some of you may already be familiar with this roadmap. Basically, there's kind of say a 10-year period for the adoption and the implementation of certain provisions within the requirements within the regulation. You have first, or it's kind of divided into general application and then the three pillars. So primary use, EHR system, secondary use, where in different points in time, members will be requested to make the certain provisions applied in their national legislation and in practice, so to have them implemented. We are now in the stage of the regulation obviously entering into force soon, and then the deadline for certain activities starts somewhere later next year, so in 2026. And the plan is to have the legal group supporting this process throughout this fairly lengthy period. It goes without saying, I guess, that there are several or actually many open issues with the EHDS implementation. This is not something that's strange in particular. This is with every new concept, with every new legislation, there are certain uncertainties and open issues coming from the regulation. I've listed here just a few, the ones in kind of broader terms, just so you get the feeling of what we are dealing with in several of these projects that I mentioned, and the several different groups, including the legal group. First one is the definition and scope of EHR systems. So this is, for example, now the role of the XDHR, among other projects, is to provide more clear definitions of what EHR systems are and what the requirements should be for such systems, like consolidated requirements on the EU level, which will then become the content of the future implementing acts. There are also some interoperability and testing concerns on the level of standards to be used, on the level of how the testing should be done for specific data categories, how compliance will be measured and against what. So this is also, and this is also important to say that, so these are not kind of open issues that will kind of stand there until somebody picks them up. So they're already being taken care of and already being discussed. So that's the key takeaway here. Then moving from kind of this broader EU level, going down to the national level, what we see, for example, in the surveys that we've done in the legal group and some of the discussions that we had, there's certainly national fragmentation and legal uncertainty on the member state level. So countries have their legacy laws that will need now to be adjusted with the harmonized with the new regulation. There is also the challenges on the technical level in terms of national, healthcare system fragmentation in member states. Then there's obviously the burden of additional compliance requirements. So we have to be certain and make sure, while working on all these specifications and implementing acts, not to add additional compliance burdens on top of existing regulations. So by all means, it's important to, of course, to provide standards for compliance, but we must avoid, the potential challenges and obstructions to, having systems in place just to for the sake of having additional, compliance burdens. Sorry, I copied this one 2 times, but basically what I wanted to say here is that there's also the burden of additional governance because there are now new data access rules that could slow down innovation. So as if you probably remember from one of the early slides, one of the aims of the regulation is to foster innovation, to speed up innovation and competitiveness of the EU in general and the member states. However, this also has to be balanced out with complex governance, many different stakeholders that will have their say in all of this, in the implementation, and different rules that are now being enforced by the regulation. And there are certainly market readiness challenges, especially for startups and small to medium-sized companies. Then finally, there's the issue of data sovereignty and infrastructure challenges. This is a story in itself. So there are many ethical, legal, technical challenges related to the infrastructures that are being built. These are obviously addressed by the member states and different bodies that I previously mentioned. But we need to make sure that alongside the increased exchange of information, we also apply safeguards. Some of the examples of the implementation use cases that we started exploring, just to give you kind of a more specific example, is that, and this is what we are discussing in the legal context and the legal group, things like EU Declaration of Conformity, obligations for manufacturers of EHR systems. So there are certainly many questions for both the organizations on the member state level, so public organizations like healthcare facilities, hospitals, for example, how they can fulfill the requirements, because there are several levels and layers of requirements that implementers need to take into consideration. And there are many questions, as you can see. I won't go too much into them because there's not so much time, but this is just to give you some flavor of what we are dealing with. And these are just a few examples from articles that I pulled up when preparing this presentation. So we have, and are currently working on, several lists of these articles that we need to have more clarity on. And the member states are working effortlessly to do that in the groups that I mentioned. And these are obviously important on a strategic and operational level. So there are many strategic questions that need to be addressed on the EU level. So do we want to go in this direction or the other? And then there's the operational level challenges on how this can be actually implemented. All of this is work in progress. Now, to give you just again a flavor of one specific project, just for you to understand the complexity of what's going on, and if you later on, if you come back to one of the slides earlier, which shows all the different projects that are dealing with these topics, you will see how complex this is. But just one, so EHR, only in this project, among other things, under the umbrella of the overall sustainability of the EHDS regulation implementation, you have many different work packages and tasks dealing with things like defining EHR systems, technical requirements and specifications, metadata information and metadata management, further specifications for some patient summary and e-prescription dispensation services, which are already in place. So to align them better with the EHDS, and also for the new services, which I mentioned, so lab reports, medical imaging, discharge reports. And then there's also, on top of all this, the challenges regarding certification. So the certification governance scheme and the governance model, the management model are being discussed and developed. On top of that, the so-called maturity model, which will take into consideration all the requirements for example, specific value sets that need to be implemented and how they can be implemented. And there's this whole work package dedicated just to certification and labeling frameworks, just to give you a bit of understanding of what's going on. So in one example, so this 5.1 EHR systems technical requirements and specifications task, just in this, and this is again just a brief snapshot of what we are dealing with. So we are delving deeper into each of the requirements, i.e. sections of just one annex, the Annex 2, which is dealing with EHR systems, to bring about the technical requirements that the vendors need to follow to implement and to develop EHR systems for EU member states and the organizations that they're providing their software for. So the project itself, this is again to give you some feedback if you're interested. It's developing numerous logical information models for all of these services and all of these software components. You have the link here if you want to follow up later after the presentation, after the webinar. But there are also common sources for all the use case, well, not all, maybe it's incorrect, but for many of the use cases that we're now discussing, including the HN guidelines, My Health at EU requirements, and many different projects that I mentioned. And in case you're interested, you can follow up using these links here. So to kind of conclude with the future legal landscape of the EHDS. So certainly there are some challenges, which some of which I addressed. So first, and the most kind of clear and immediate one is the interoperability of systems. So harmonizing different, technical data standards across the member states is a challenge in and of itself. This is followed by the data protection and privacy, which is following the GDPR, but needs to be more and is in many ways more detailed in the EHDS. But there are certainly a lot of open questions related to open issues, which I mentioned earlier. Then there's a public and service provider trust. So there are many concerns that we hear about from the stakeholders regarding data misuse from the organizations, from the public bodies in member states regarding the additional administrative governance burden. There are obviously digital infrastructure gaps, both on the EU level, so between the member states, but also on the member state level, so the national, regional levels, particularly in what can be considered to be less digitized regions, so not just for healthcare, but in general. Then something that we are experiencing in all of these groups that we're having, it's that the fact that these matters are so kind of complex and required such a high level of expertise and multidisciplinary approach is that there's actually a shortage of professionals in areas like cybersecurity, legal questions, technical questions, medical questions. And we hear also people in this webinar are kind of just a select few of the people who could even start contributing to all of these issues. Then there are complex governance structures which are totally new or fairly new, building upon previous ones, but having now to coordinate in many different ways. Obviously, the elephant in the room is the potential and likely increase in financial administrative costs to implement all of this, and the balance between the innovation and ethics. Some of the questions for the future that we have in some of these groups that I mentioned and projects are, and to address some of the implementation challenges, are potential GDPR revisions. So EHDS does address some of the GDPR questions to a certain point, but certain things are still left open. The question is whether the EHDS is robust enough to ensure secure data processing in healthcare settings. Then there's the impact of the AI Act and AI, in general, development of AI in general, which is, speeding up, as you probably know. So probably things that we could discuss today will be obsolete in a month's time. This is how many different challenges on the EU level of how to harmonize laws, technical infrastructure, standards, and so on. Then there's a question of global data exchanges, and recently even more so, maybe, for example, with the potential transatlantic deals with our partners across the Atlantic Ocean and other countries, Asia, Africa, emerging giants in those countries. And then there's the question of emerging technologies unrelated to what we're used to. So, remote care devices, genomics data advancements, real-time patient monitoring, and so on. So there are many, many open issues. How can the stakeholders engage and help co-create EHDS implementing acts? This is a question to my partner and my good friend and colleague, Eva. So I will give the floor to her to follow up with a couple of slides more. So thank you for your patience.
Yeah. Thank you, Vanya, for the very comprehensive presentation about the requirements and the challenges of EHDS. I tried to be very, very short, looking at the time, so that we have a little time for your questions also. I have mainly 2 points to add to this beautiful presentation, and it is how you can contribute and be engaged in this during this very important phase when the implementing acts are being created, and how can we, IHE-Europe, also contribute. So what you can do, you can submit your input for the already mentioned XTHR project that deals with the implementing acts regarding the primary use of data, and also for the TEHDAS2 project regarding the secondary use of health data, and use the possibility to be active and submit your input during the public consultations of the implementing acts. Then other possibilities: join different communities. I believe there are, I'm sure there are more, but to mention some of them, you could join Hospitals on Fire, which is a community-driven initiative that brings together healthcare providers, IT vendors, and interoperability experts to support the adoption and implementation of the European format in hospitals. The other one is the Industry XNet, which is a network of people from different areas, was created during the ExpandEH project, and its purpose is to gather input from the participants about the format implementation and about the common EHDS challenges. Its achievements, this group published recently in January their paper on 3 recommendations. Some of them were already elaborated in Vanya's presentation. It's the 3 topics is the need of for use case driven guidance for interpreting requirements for EHR systems. Then the second one is a scaling testing framework for EHDS interoperability, and the third is on the interoperability architecture. The other possibility is how to be engaged and participate on the upcoming events that were already put in the chat so that you have there more information. Our IHE-Europe Experience Days in Vienna will this year focus on laboratory data exchange, their national implementations and international perspectives. Then initiatives around AI, IHE and FIRE, profile development and methodology. And also on the EHDS implementation, the national roadmaps and strategic plans and approaches. The next slide, please. So this was how you can contribute and being engaged. And this is the part where IHE-Europe sees how IHE can support the implementation of EHDS. IHE-Europe published in January this year a white paper describing how the IHE methodology can contribute to the successful implementation of EHDS. This is the link where you can read the whole white paper. Next slide, please. Mainly to the content, it's about we IHE-Europe see that the success of EHDS relies heavily on that how it is the format is implemented by all the stakeholders and how fast it will achieve widespread adoption. Next slide, please. In this context, it is crucial to achieve ready-to-use interoperability, meaning that health systems and services should be easily connected with each other across different countries and organizations. Realizing this vision requires overcoming several challenges. IHE can play an important role in overcoming these challenges by leveraging the IHE methodology that has been successfully adopted by many organizations around the world. The interoperability use cases of the EHDS can effectively be defined through IHE profiles. IHE profiles that are implementable and conformance testable building blocks with a multi-decade proven track record. And IHE profiles are created in collaboration with standards development organizations of the base interoperability standards. To name only some of them, HS7, FIRE, or SNOMED City, or LOINC. And there are several other ones. And besides the profiles, the IHE methodology contains a robust conformance testing framework, which is the IHE Connectathon. It understands the ways to demonstrate the compliance for products within the IHE integration statements and IHE Connectathon seals. So to conclude, the IHE-Europe's white paper explores how using IHE's existing reliable methodology mitigates the risk for the stakeholders on the road towards a successful EHDS implementation. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is my final slide, which shows how the IHE-Europe Connectathons looks like. There are over 500 testers in one room testing their interoperability. So this you can experience at the end of June in Vienna this year. Thank you. It's a slide for your questions, but we have only 5 minutes left, so I hope we will have time to respond.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Vanya. There are no questions in the chat, but feel free to unmute yourself and give a question. For me, for example, Eva, what struck to me, or let's start with Vanya, There are several webinars on EHDS. Most of the time we have slides that are not so easy to understand. So you gave a very clear overview. Thank you so much. As everybody understood, we still await implementing acts, so we still await the exact legal implications that are there for the software industry and the healthcare institutions. And then on the other hand, Eva, as you pointed out, the XT-EHR joint action, you said you can submit your comments on the implementing acts. In practice, how will this happen? Will this go through a forum, or do we just, because when I go to the project website, I can contact them, I can write them a message, but will they communicate? How will they communicate? And how can we provide our feedback then? Because especially for Belgium, I do want to gather the feedback and submit it to the project.
Maybe regarding XT-EHR, maybe Vanya, you can respond. I'm not so involved in the commenting phase, but for example, for the TEDAS project, there was a timetable published how and when to some specific implementing acts, when is the period and what is the topic. It's for TEDAS too. For XT-EHR, maybe you can add that. Vanya.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. It's the same. So in the XT-EHR project, there is a work package that's dedicated to facilitating stakeholder consultations. The first ones are beginning in March already, so in kind of a month's time. I'm not sure which ones are each month there's a few. And just to clarify, so these are not on the implementing acts themselves. The implementing acts will be drafted by the Commission in some time. We're still waiting for some of the roadmaps for the exact dates, but these will be stakeholder consultations on the documents that will support or that will provide the baseline for the implementing acts, right? So in a way, the member states, different organizations can have during these stakeholder consultations, and this is the purpose, basically can have their voice heard, and they can comment on the documents that will become the basis of the implementing acts, and will provide the basis for the negotiations for the implementing act, because there are still several stages to go before their adoption. And I think Ben has his hand raised and also has shared. Thank you for the links for the stakeholder consultations. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, I found that. Thank you so much. Ben, would you like to speak up? Feel free to unmute yourself, and you can.
Hi, sure. Thank you for the presentation. It was very useful to understand better the eHealth member state expert group legal governance arrangements. And I had just one question about the aspects in terms of opt-outs and restrictions specifically, and in terms of the kind of and also in terms of patient contributed data and the kind of legal aspects of the kind of around that in terms of the categories of data that people were required to hold. Within the XT-EHR work packages, I don't see a kind of clearly where those aspects of would be handled. So from a kind of, I think the standards are moving along quite well in terms of the actual structured data, but in terms of the kind of interactions, and then also around this patient specified restrictions on part or opt-outs. I was just curious if how prominent that was in the legal discussions, and where in the technical, the XTHR kind of technical plans that might fit.
Yeah. So quick. There's a quick and there's a short and a long answer. So the short answer is that this is actually this very question is actually being discussed in several different groups. I think most of the discussions were actually held on the legal work group level. On the XTH, and this is kind of part of the long answer, and the XTHR, which is dealing mostly with the kind of more technical aspects of the implementation of the regulation. As far as I know, this question is not addressed kind of on a legal terms, but it is being addressed in different fora, different work packages and different tasks, actually, depending on the services that it's dealing with. So, for example, there are different tasks specific to discharge reports, lab reports, e-prescription need dispensation, patient summaries, and these questions are being discussed on that level in each of these tasks separately. We also had the discussion on the level of the EHR systems in general, but again, we don't have any conclusive answers. So I'm thinking that in the next couple of months, probably some of these questions will come, or the answers will come from different groups. Hopefully also we'll get input from the stakeholder consultations to be able to provide certain guidelines on how to deal with that topic.
Great, thanks.
So work in progress, basically.
Thank you for the question. I see that we have passed the time, but if there is a last question, maybe we can take it. If not, thank you very much to Vanya and Eva for the presentation and for being here. Thank you for the participant also. And you will find shortly on the website the recording of this webinar and also the presentation of Vanya and Eva. Thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you. Hope you
Have
found
a nice
it useful.
day.
Have a nice day. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye. Ciao.